Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the Where is Stress Costing Your Organization masterclass with the subtitle, and how can you turn it into a competitive advantage? So, if you're on this masterclass, you're probably in leadership, you're maybe part of L&D, you're maybe a directorship, you're middle management, and you're experiencing stress in your company in some way, shape, or another. If you're not, you might be someone who is within an organization as a entry level person who is experiencing stress, and you're wondering how stress on your side is impacting the company and how the company's stress is impacting you. Or maybe you're not even aware that companies can experience stress and you're just curious about this title. Either way, welcome. And it's going to be a relatively short masterclass, but it's going to go really deep into a mapping process that I've created, which I'll explain towards the end, which is a tool I use in workshops to help companies identify where the stress is and what we can do about it. But before we get started, I wanted to share a quote, and it is: "The pessimist complains about the wind, the optimist expects it to change, and the leader adjusts the sails." And basically, whenever I'm doing workshops, I really like this analogy of the sea and boats and sailors, because as we know, that ships aren't designed for the harbor, they're designed for the sea. But if you're going to be in the sea, a good captain knows that you're going to experience waves, you're going to experience storms. So the problem is not the storms, it's how we manage them. And so when it comes to leadership, I genuinely feel like part of that is the ability to weather the storms, the ability to see where they're coming, and the ability to know what to do when they arrive. And so this workshop is really going to be a way at not looking at the storms as the issue, but it's actually what can we do with the sails. So let's get started. So this matters because resilience isn't just about surviving, it's about thriving. And one of the things I hear a lot is that people have this really bad relationship with resilience. It's this idea that I need to be able to weather through any storm, but we're focusing on that too much. My definition of resilience is the distance between the crisis and your recovery. How long or short is that gap? So resilience is your ability to shorten that gap. If something happens today, how long before we can get back on our feet and continue? Now that has different effects internally and externally, and I'll go through that a little bit later on as well. The main thing is that high pressure environments are inevitable, but how you respond to that stress determines your performance, whether you're an individual, whether you're in the leadership and you're looking after the people who are in the delivery, whether you're making decisions for the team and managing conflict and performance, whether you're in higher leadership or CEO level, C-suite, and you're looking at decisions for the company or looking ahead at what the trends are. Either way, you're responding to stress to determine your performance. But the other thing is, stress is a natural occurrence. It happens to us all. Stress in the body is how our body releases hormones to give us the energy we need to be able to tackle a challenge. And it's the same thing with companies, but unchecked stress over time leads to high turnover, low productivity, and team dysfunction when it comes to organizations. The resilient organizations, though, adapt faster and they retain top client. A really good example of this is how many companies survived the pandemic. Some of them didn't change, they didn't adjust themselves, they didn't adapt, and they suffered as a result. Some of them took it as an opportunity, and that's what we're going to be doing today: is how can we look at stress as an opportunity to be more resilient than our competitor organizations. When it comes to understanding organizational stress, the real big point of this masterclass is to really realize that there's a hidden cost to all this. There's certain things that's going to be happening within and without your organization that you may not realize are linked to each other. And so this masterclass is looking at exactly what those problems are and what to do about them. So some of the common symptoms that you might have actually experienced within your organization are things like absenteeism, where people are going to be taking sick leave a lot, disengagement, so people are physically in the room, but they're not mentally, conflict, and you're not being able to work together, high turnover, you're having to pay for training and onboarding all the time because people aren't staying, people aren't happy within the workplace environment. And then you have more direct business impacts like lower revenue, reduced efficiency, and reputational risks. And that reputational risk is an issue because it makes it a lot difficult with the onboarding process. Will people join an environment which has a bad reputation? So a lot of the times, what you realize is the onboarding process happens before you even need to start looking for another replacement. It starts with the reputation of your company. So one thing that I would ask you in this moment is, which of these is showing up in your company right now? Just having to think, whether you're an employee, whether you're in the management, whether you're in C-suite, which of these kind of things is starting to show up in your company that maybe you've been paying attention to, but maybe you haven't. So before we go any further, my name is Andre Bright, and I'm a burnout prevention coach. So I help mid-level management to continue to excel without sacrificing their well-being and head towards burnout. And by doing that, I effectively help the companies reduce their turnover, improve culture within organizations, improve team management. But my particular experience with burnout actually happened over about an 8 or 9 month period. We just had the credit crunch of 2009, 2010. And so there were no jobs. And I went back into my other occupation, which was dance. I became a professional dancer for 3 years and then came back into architecture. Now, when I went back into that environment, I joined a company which was exploding. They were growing exponentially. But what that meant for me as an individual was that there wasn't enough resourcing. There wasn't enough support. There wasn't enough mentorship or training, because everyone who would have otherwise been doing that was so stretched that they didn't have time to focus on me as I was joining the team. And I won't go into the details, but unfortunately, at the very end, the final meeting that I had with them, they said something that which we both agreed on in the end. They had misjudged their needs. What they needed was someone with many, many years of experience who didn't need supervision, who could just hit the ground running. And what they put in their job application was someone who is a relatively entry level person within that field, and we parted ways. But what that made me realize is that actually companies themselves experience stress as well, even through growth, or even through decline, or even through stagnation. And so there's always an opportunity for stress to be affecting the company. You might experience growth, you might experience high turnover, you might experience reduced efficacy or efficiency, and like I mentioned before, you might have reputational risk. Things might be affecting your company that you may not even be realizing are connected to each other. So now I'd like to introduce the corporate stress mapping model that I developed over time. So this is a systematic approach to diagnose the real issues that are going on within the company. And there's 4 steps to it, really. There's the external stressors, which is the market, the economy, the competition, the compliance issues. You've got the internal stresses, which is the leadership challenges, the unclear roles, like I mentioned before, the poor communication, for example. Then you've got the causes, which is the root drivers like toxic culture, management gaps, and then his symptoms like turnover, absenteeism, conflict management, all those kind of things that I mentioned before. And what I did was I took these 4 elements, which are actually the same for individual stress. You'd have the stressors, which is external, the stresses, which is what's happening within your body. You'd have the causes and the symptoms. I took the same model for an individual and I applied it to an organization. And I mapped them along a mapping framework that I'll show you in a second. Before we get to that framework, though, the really simple way to do this, I'm going to assume right now I'm working through a workshop with you. I've got your team ahead of me. We've got 15 to 30 of your employees, and we're going through an exercise. The first thing I'll do is you ask you 4 questions. And each of these 4 questions, you will take your post-it notes, you'll populate a board, and we'll be able to step back and look at what the issues are. And those 4 questions are: number one is, what external challenges affect your company? And that finds out the external stressors. What internal pressures do employees and leaders face? And that finds out the internal stresses. What underlying workplace issues contribute to these stresses? And that finds out the causes. And then how does this stress show up in daily operations? And that finds out the symptoms. Each of those, we do exhaustive amounts of brainstorming. And there's different exercises that I do to be able to get that out of your team. We'll create a whole heap of these examples, and then we map them onto this board. So this is the corporate stress mapping model. Like I mentioned, you've got the external stresses on the right hand side, which influence an organization. You've got the internal stresses on the left hand side, which are within the organization. You've got the symptoms which are above the line, which is the visible indicators of stress. And I've got a nice iceberg to illustrate that. As we all know, what you see of the iceberg is often only 20% of the issue, because the causes, what is underneath the waterline, is the underlying issues. And that's often the biggest issues. So let's assume we've done this exercise with your team. We've populated all these post-it notes and these ideas, whether it's online or in person, and we've mapped them onto this board. It would look something like this. So here we have each of those quadrants will be populated with different things. And it's important to have a look at some of these to identify what will be the difference between each four and where they would go. Some of the ones I would just point out to you are things like globalization pressures, or for example, we had a pandemic a few years ago. Like, that is an external cause of a lot of the things that might have been happening within your company, which you may or may not have aligned as the you may have toxic work culture, which might be a cause internally. You might have conflict among teams, which is because of the toxic work culture. But the pressures might be coming because the organization is experiencing supply chain disruptions because of a global pandemic. So all of these things might be mapped towards each other. And the final stage of this, so during the workshop, we identify what these challenges are. We map them onto the corporate stress mapping model, as you can see, which gives us a visual idea of where all these issues are. Now, depending on what your needs are, we might be able to, we'll use voting techniques, for example, to find out which ones we need to challenge first. And then we'll create ideas to create solutions for some of these, right? And let me show you what this looks like in a steps form. This is actually how we turn it into a competitive advantage. We, like I said, we do the corporate stress mapping audit. We go through solution ideation. So after we find the problems, we figure out what solutions actually work with your company individually. We'll go through action commitments. Who is going to do what and commit to them? And we have partnerships. We have buddy systems. We have peer-to-peer support. And then we have monitoring feedback. So each time I work with a company, there will be at least 1 to 3 months worth of monitoring afterwards, where I'll just be peeking my head in. We'll do little sessions to see how things are progressing and what support you need. Now, this is something you can do by yourself, right? I've given you enough to be able to do this as an exercise. Now, obviously, there's a few things that I've missed out in here just because of time. I want this to be a relatively short video, but it will give you all the high level ideas of where your problems are and how you can turn them into competitive advantages by solving them. Because if you think about it, going back to the idea of using the leadership as a sea and leadership as a boat on a sea, the anchor we can often see as the problem, right? Is holding us back. But the opportunity is unleashing it from whatever is holding us back, which means that we'll be able to go again. So each of these issues, we frame it as an opportunity. Now, one last thing of this process that I just want to show you, just because it can be so important to see how much of an issue this really is, going back to this slide, is quantifying some of this. Thinking about high employee turnover. How much do you spend? How much does it cost you? A higher employee turnover? How much is decreased engagement costing you? How much is low productivity within your organization costing you each year? If people were working at 100%, where would you be versus where you are now? And that is a really good way to map how important these issues are and which ones maybe are the ones to start with solving. And I would obviously help you with that as well. Now, like I said, you can do all this yourself. And this is where you're faced with the blue pill or the red pill. One of my favorite movies is Matrix, and you probably would have seen it. So the blue pill is you do this yourself. So I've given you the framework for the model. This is something you can take into your organizations and do tomorrow if you wanted to. It's a very simple concept. You can put it up on screen. You can show them this video. You can go through it yourself and figure out what the issues are. You can figure out your own solutions, and then you can go and do them. The only thing is, what we find is that sometimes you need a little bit of coaxing. So if you need someone to help you who has gone through it before, developed the framework, etc., and I have developed 3 options for you as next steps. So the first is the Stress the Strength Sprint. This is a 2-hour workshop, and it's virtual or in person. And really, it's for small teams. And the idea with this one is I'll go in for 2 hours, we'll be able to identify the issues, but then you will be able to implement them. So it's very high level, but it gives you all the things you need. There's also digital support and resources that will give you to be able to help you. And then the next one up is the Resilience Partnership Workshop. This one's more intensive. It's a half day workshop. It's for slightly larger teams of 10 to 30 who need more intervention. And this is more of a deep dive. So this one is more customized. You come out with an action plan, come out with resources, and there's a lot more deeper follow up. The last level of this is the Resilience Transformation Program. This is 3 months. This is where I come in and I'm doing more in person work with you. And this is where I'm delivering workshops, coaching, and training. So within that 3 months, there'll be a certain amount of hours that I'll come in with you and spend time with your team and do the delivery for you. And one of the things I would say actually with this is that sometimes you might have your in-house team. If you have an in-house team, then you might only need the stress to strength sprint. There's enough in there for you to get going. You know, if you're a slightly bigger organization, but you don't have the time to implement it yourself, then you might want to go for the Resilience Partnership Workshop. But if you literally don't have the time to even come up with the exercises themselves, then you can go for the slightly bigger program. So either way, I want to say thank you. Thank you for spending time with me. This is about 17 minutes at this point. If you want to have a conversation about one of those three options, then you can use the discovery call link in the description, or you can use this QR code in front of you, or email ebwalaglobalcoaching@gmail.com with any questions. And I'll look forward to seeing you soon. My name is Andre Bright, and I'm a burnout prevention coach and facilitator. And I hopefully see you in the future.